Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 10.16, the calm before there. We are back.
Yes, I am so ready. This is the last chapter of Arc 10.
Yeah.
Things went crazy last time. You already know what happened. Muzazi pulled up with the fucking new form. He awoke. Aklima was like, "Oh!" And Muzazi was like, "I am Muzazi." And then Balte
I am
was
Speed.
Like, yeah, and then Balte was like, "I'm dead." He's dead, right? Or is he just defeated?
He's retired, it seems.
He's retired. Alright. And with that, let's get started. Balte Kojiro's severed arm fell to the floor, crystals shattering. Green aether dissipated as the severed limb wrote itself out of existence. The owner of the arm fell to his knees, looking numbly at the stump. Just like it had been with Hans Allier, there was no blood, just more jagged crystals protruding from the wound like frozen blood. A relieved smile crept across his lips. "It's your win, Negan," he said softly, "just like it should have been the first time." Otori Muzazi had finally stopped moving. He stood in front of Kojiro, looking down, his eyes hidden by the long black and white hair that had fallen down around him. He deactivated one of his radiants, but the second still protruded from his other hand. Long silence drifted on, the Supreme Heir watching from the corner, before Muzazi spoke. "That isn't my name," he said, and deactivated his radiant. Sorry, my throat's all fucked up. Balte took a deep breath, shaking, and reached up with his other hand. With laborious effort, he peeled the crystals over his face free, blood pouring liberally from the impromptu flame, revealing his own wide, panicked eyes. He had seen the future, after all. He knew what was coming next. "Negan, please," he whimpered. "You can't!" "There is doubtless evidence of your crimes all around here, if you know to look for them," Muzazi said. "An investigation will produce enough for you to be sentenced to some form of imprisonment. Some kind of rehabilitation, maybe. I have a contact in the Grace family who will be happy to assist." "Kill me!" Balte screamed, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Just kill me, Negan, you sick fuck! I can't live like this anymore!" Muzazi's hand shook for a moment, but he quickly steadied it. He took a deep breath. "Once locked down," he said, protocol driving his words forward, "these quarters will serve as a suitable holding space for you before the proper authorities arrive." I'm so sorry, my voices are off. There's something wrong with
No worries, no worries. You've been doing a lot of talking. You just come out of Good Trouble JoJo tabletop.
Yeah, my throat's like super fucked up right now. And with that, he turned and began to walk away. "Negan!" Balte cried out from behind him. "You can't! Negan, please!" Muzazi squeezed his eyes shut, but his resolve went unchanged. This was a decision he had made. There was so little of him that existed in this world. He couldn't afford to go back on his own choices. The Supreme Heir joined him as he reached the door. She'd circled all the way around the room, to avoid going near Balte, who was still screaming after the two of them. Muzazi had to admit he'd almost forgotten she was here. How careless of him. She looked over her shoulder at the prone Balte Kojiro. "You won't kill him?" she asked. Muzazi shook his head. "Why not? Don't you want revenge?" Muzazi opened his mouth to sigh, but instead words came out. "His crimes were against a person called Negan Rush. Nobody else has the right to seek vengeance for them. And that person doesn't exist anymore." Without another word, he strode out of the room, and the air followed. 7 days before Avaman's assault. You thought it was over, but it's back! This whole thing really was a mess. Barry sweated in his suit as he picked through the evidence the Battle of the Child Garden had left behind. He'd drawn the short straw. While his colleagues were pouring through surveillance footage and the like, he had the unenviable task of picking through Gretchen Hale's remains. Lucky him. More than once he'd had to hold back vomit. There really wasn't enough of Gretchen Hale left to call remains, just a pile of shattered bones and a slurry of meat and skin. The fell beast had really done a number on her. The only truly identifiable piece of her he'd found was half of her face, peeled away and stuck to the wall with her dried blood. Gross. It didn't help that they were on a time limit either. That detective special officer, Winston Grace, was meant to be arriving within the hour, and they wanted all the remains collected and cataloged by the time he arrived. Apparently, the kid was a real diva when it came to stuff like this. Barry was just bagging up the twisted mass of what might have once been a foot when he saw it. Behind his mask, his brow furrowed. The hell? There, right in the corner, previously concealed by the gore, was a weapon. A dagger of some kind, with a black hilt and a red blade halfway embedded in the floor. Fell beasts didn't use weapons like this, so was this something Hale had been using during the fight? As his co-worker searched the function room behind him, Barry reached out and seized the dagger by the hilt, ready to collect it as evidence. Contact confirmed. Neural structure, analyzing. Neural structure, compatible. Analyzing with a Z, by the way. Clearing consciousness. Consciousness cleared. Ready for download. Download complete. Gretchen Hale let out a sigh of relief, deeper than she'd expected, as she pulled the dagger out of the floor. It seemed her last gambit had worked. Judging from the memories she had access to, it seemed that a toy Muzazi had come out victorious in the fight, but Balte had survived. It was strange, but it seemed like she should be happier about that. Perhaps some aspects of her personality had been lost in translation. She found it difficult to care too much about that. After all, she'd survived. She glanced down at the dagger in her large, hairy hand. This weapon truly was her masterpiece. It had been created on the spur of the moment, fueled by desperation and fear, but she'd done it all the same. She'd managed to create an aether armament that could record her consciousness and place it into the brain of its next wielder. A novel concept, based on the old demons of the dawn from the UAP. Gonna need to hear more about that lore. Also, Anubis?
Fraser Barry's like, slice and Folderef, kill Jotaro.
Kill Balte. Before any of her new vessel's co-workers could notice, she slipped the red dagger into her pocket. There was a lot to plan. Getting revenge on Yggdrasil was impractical for the time being, but it would happen. There was a fire burning in her now, after all. That fucking tree had killed her in such a humiliating way. Sorry, I blinked. You alright there, Barry? Called out one of the other investigators, an umbrant with a thin pencil mustache. No problem, Gretchen called over her new bulky shoulder. The gravelly voice felt uncomfortable coming out of her mouth. Just gotta head out for break after this, you know? The umbrant rolled his eyes. Lazy bastard, he muttered, before going back to his script. First then. She had to get hold of a better body than this. She didn't much fancy walking around with an oversized shape like this, stumbling around with an impractical center of gravity. She'd find someone with a similar body shape to her original, have the dagger transfer her over, and lie in wait for her moment. It wouldn't be a problem. After all, right now she was as free as a bird. Gretchen Hale got up and walked out of the room, leaving her corpse and her life behind. I'm already seeing a future here, Tan, that makes me worried. A future in which Gretchen Hale takes over Ruth's body. I'm just saying. Laying back in his bed, Morgan knocked squeaked, clenching and unclenching his hand experimentally. It felt tougher than it had before. Was that because there was bark just beneath his skin, impeding his movements? It does not work like that. Wait, oh, fuck, I don't know his voice anymore. It does not work.
Well, he doesn't speak, so that's why you don't know his voice.
So true, said Aetheral Yggdrasil, its voice as clear and vague as a stray thought. Morgan chuckled to himself. All around his bed was medical equipment, discarded, as it had already become clear they were not needed. Yggdrasil had already taken care of the healing anyway. Well, he was taking care of it. According to the experts, Muzang wasn't a thing that just went away. It attacked the human body relentlessly until it died. The usual treatment was amputation, but once it had gotten its hooks into you, it wouldn't be letting go. Aetheral Yggdrasil, now part of Morgan's body, was just continually healing the damage that Muzang was inflicting. A constant tug of war that would only end with Morgan's death. It was a weird sensation to know he'd be seconds from death if not for the kindness of a tree. It's strange, he muttered, not meant to be heard. But then again, Aenir could hear everything from him. What is strange? Morgan smirked ruefully. Hearing you, but not seeing you. There is nothing to be seen. I've invested myself fully into your body to save your life. If you would like to see me, you would have to open yourself up, which I would not recommend. Why? Blood loss. No, Morgan rubbed his forehead. I mean, why did you save me? Why did you go this far to save me? It's not like we were best friends before this. I just don't get why you'd sacrifice so much. There was nothing but silence for a long time. Outside the window, Morgan saw the ships of investigators drifting past. He'd seen a transport taking off with some haste before. Perhaps it had been taking Kojiro away. He hoped they'd be careful. The bastard was tricky. Just as Morgan's thoughts started to drift, though, Einir Yggdrasil answered. You alone have never asked anything of me, it replied. No kindnesses have been requested, and I know that you alone would never demand a promise of me. That is why I saved you, I think. Morgan shifted in his bed. Well, he muttered, thanks. I don't really get it, but yeah, thanks. There was no reply, and none was needed. They just sat there, looking at the stars until the doors slid open. How's it going, Commander? Morgan called out without looking. Those practiced, purposeful footsteps could only belong to one person. Commander, Muzazi said, walking into view. I don't recall ever requesting a title like that. He looked different, what with that white streak of hair running through his usual black. Not a bad change, but a change all the same. The sword he'd always carried around was gone, too. In fact, Morgan couldn't see a sword on him at all. Morgan shrugged as much as the bed would allow. Want it or not, it looks like it's happening. These things have a habit of settling themselves. I'd accept it if I were you. Really, Muzazi mused, stepping over to the window. He clasped his hands behind his back as he observed the void. And what's that? The commander of the 7 blades of the turning of the air. Well, the 2.5 blades of the turning of the air. It's a powerful title. A title like that can be a shield. Muzazi glanced over his shoulder, raising an eyebrow. And why would I need a shield? Officer knocked. The constant smirk faded from Morgan's lips. I think you know why. Muzazi did not blink. I would like for you to tell me. Balte was one of Paradise Karen's biggest allies. Through him, she had control over the Supreme Air. That isn't something she's going to be happy about losing. She'll come after you. If the second contender was wanting my head, I'd take any kind of protection I could get. Slowly, Muzazi nodded to himself, stepping away from the window. Any kind of protection, yes. Like a title. Or a friend. He extended a hand down towards Morgan. I understand you're close with the 4th contender, Wu Ming. Morgan nodded. He taught me everything I know. He's a good friend. The words seemed to stick in Muzazi's throat, but he said them all the same. Perhaps I, too, can be your good friend? Morgan's smirk returned. So, you want the protection of the 4th contender to protect you from the 2nd. You finally learned how to dance, Commander Muzazi. Despite everything, it seemed Muzazi couldn't stop his own lips from curling up. It seems unavoidable. Their hands clasped, and Muzazi pulled Morgan up to his feet. There was a lot of work to be done. No, he just wants to be Morgan's friend. He's not this conniving. I don't believe it.
There's a little bit of it in there.
No. Popcorn.
Oh god, okay. 4 days before Averman's assault. On Shendor, nothing much ever seemed to change. Like I said, I can't talk loudly here. Days rolled by slowly, and so did people's lives. The only way you could really tell that time was passing was with the harvest.
I can read if you're not.
Oh, could you please?
Yeah, I just need my throat. Rena Raish wouldn't have it any other way. She enjoyed her quiet days, looking after the farm, taking these relaxed walks through the fields. Great walls of wheat rustled in the wind on either side of her as she strolled, a basket tucked under her arm. Her eyes widened just fractionally as she crested the hill. Normally she didn't run into anyone else out here. He was a young man, oddly familiar looking, with black and white hair tied back in a short ponytail.
He cut his hair.
Grey eyes...
He got a haircut.
Nice. His grey eyes were scanning the horizon, and his brow was furrowed with such concentration that he clearly hadn't noticed her. His clothes were fancy, some kind of robes. Clearly he wasn't from here. Raina smiled pleasantly as she approached. Afternoon, she said. The man blinked, glancing towards her. Oh, good afternoon to you as well, he said hurriedly. She'd been right. He really hadn't realized she was there. Raina followed his gaze, looking out at the rolling golden hills. Wait, what does he mean he'd been right about he hadn't realized?
She'd been right, he hadn't...
So you wrote she'd been right, he
His
really
brow
hadn't...
was furrowed with such concentration that he clearly hadn't noticed her, and then she realizes, oh, he really hadn't noticed me.
Oh, well. Raina followed his gaze, looking out the rolling golden hills. Quite a view, huh? He nodded slowly. Yes, it's very nice. You're not from around here, huh? Raina smiled. Ain't often we get visitors. For a moment the man didn't say anything. There was just the whistling of the wind and the brushing of the wheat. Reyna was just beginning to think he maybe hadn't heard her when he spoke again. From around here? He mused, as if the very concept was alien. No, I don't think I am, no. She raised an amused eyebrow. That up for debate or something? You don't sound too sure. I wasn't until I came here, really. I thought I might have come here a long time ago, the man said wistfully, before shaking his head. Forgive my rudeness. My name is Atoy Muzazi. I'm a special officer from the Supremacy. He extended his arm for a handshake. Wait, so is he the captain now, or is he just back to being a special officer?
He's a commander, but he doesn't introduce himself as that.
He loves being a special officer. Ooh, Reyna whistled, accepting the handshake. Fancy you. I'm Reyna Raish. I work at a farm nearby. Well, mostly I repair automatics, but you get it. She wasn't quite sure why at first, but Atoy Muzazi's face dropped when she said her name. His hand continued to grip hers. Something wrong? She asked, cocking her head. Muzazi came back to himself, releasing her hand and plunging his own into his pockets. Nothing, he said hurriedly. It's just... Forgive me if this is inappropriate, but I've been speaking with some of the townsfolk. With that, her face dropped. Ah, so that was what this was about. Muzazi went on. They mentioned that, well, that person, the swordsman who left and became famous. He was your brother, is that right? Reyna sighed, tucking her basket under her arm once again. Look, if you're here to try and discover some secret family techniques or whatever, there aren't any. We're farmers. We farm. That dummy went and got himself killed all on his own. That's not what I... Muzazi hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm sorry, I was just wondering. That man, what kind of person was he? What do you mean? Reyna furrowed her brow. Why would you want to know? I'm just curious. It was inappropriate. Of course it was inappropriate for a total stranger to walk up and ask her what her dead brother was like. By all rights, she should tell him to get lost. But when she looked into those eyes, those glinting gray eyes, she couldn't help but speak. He was quiet, I guess? The words came out awkwardly. She hadn't talked about her brother in years. Always with his nose in a book, or out practicing swords with his friends. Sometimes he liked to do painting. He was good at that. He should have stuck to it. You don't get killed painting, do you? Her breath hitched. That idiot should have just stayed here, where it was safe, and painted. Would he have been happy, do you think? Muzazi murmured, if that was how things had turned out. Reyna slowly shook her head. No, I don't think he would have been happy doing anything except what he did. That's the worst part. The basket slipped out from her arm and landed roughly on the floor, fruit spilling out. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the wind. Could you please leave? For a moment, it looked as if this Atoy Muzazi was going to refuse, as if he was going to say something else or crouch down to pick up the fallen fruit. A tiny part of her expected him to, for a reason she couldn't quite place. In the end, though, he did as she asked. He nodded and turned, walking away. He didn't look back as he became a dot on the horizon. Reyna never saw him again. 5 hours after Avaman's assault. Muzazi took the paintbrush away from the canvas, licking his lips nervously as he took his creation in. It was meant to have been a depiction of a red apple resting on a table. What had resulted was a blotch of red staining a lump of brown. Utterly unrecognizable, and utterly awful. There was no talent there to speak of, natural or otherwise. Should the first utter be utterly, or was that supposed to be utter?
Utterly unrecognizable, yeah.
Muzazi smiled. Just as he was putting the canvas away, however, the doors to his quarters suddenly slid open, and Morgan Noct charged in, white in the face. He was breathing heavily. Clearly he'd sprinted all the way here. Muzazi immediately leapt up. Morgan was meant to have been guarding a climber. Had something happened? Morgan spoke before Muzazi. Have you seen it? Is your videograph on? Muzazi shook his head, confused. Seen what? What are you talking about? Before he answered, Morgan staggered over to the videograph, fumbling around the bottom of it for the on button. It's on all frequencies, he panted. On a loop. A message. We think it's all over the Supremacy. Some kind of virus or something. It took him a second to find the button, but eventually there was a click, and the face of the man called Skipper appeared on the screen. Muzazi's eyes widened. What was this? Last he'd seen Dragon Hadrian and his crew, they'd been at the true meet of the final church, struggling against the machinations of the different sects there. Had something else happened since then? Skipper looked at the camera, grinning. He was wearing a dark, long coat as he lounged back in a chair, the camera focused on his face. He narrowed his green eyes. This is Avaman, isn't it, Tan? With the long, dark coat?
No? Well, we'll see what happens.
Is this, okay, yeah. This is gonna be pretty confusing for most of you, he said, cracking his neck. You must be thinking, who's this guy? Can't blame you. Sorry for interrupting your shows, folks. I need to make a little announcement here. Oh my god, I can't do the skipper voice. I'm sorry. My throat. Muzazi glanced towards Morgan. You said this was all over the Supremacy? Morgan nodded. Every screen I've tried is showing the same thing. You know this guy? It must have shown on Muzazi's face. He nodded grimly. We've crossed paths in the past. He's called Skipper, the captain of a crew of... Skipper interrupted from the videograph. Well, introductions are in order, first of all. He grinned easily. My name's Zachariah Esmeralda, and it probably doesn't mean much to you guys. Some people call me Skipper. Again, probably drawing a blank. I'm not exactly famous. But let me tell you what I'm all about. What are you thinking, man? Muzazi was in utter disbelief. The entire Supremacy was listening to this rambling. Had Skipper or Zachariah Esmeralda or whoever he was gone mad? Around 60 years back, Skipper leaned back, I tried to take out the Supreme. Didn't do too well since, he ain't dead. But I got a good hit in. Took his ear right off. But that's the biggest injury he's had in a good while. None of those contenders or whatever are giving him what I did, that's for sure. Which brings me to my point here. The grin dropped from Skipper's face, and he stared dead into the camera. Ready for round 2, old-timer? I am. I'll be waiting at Elysian Fields. Bring whoever you want. Let's have fun. With that final challenge, the message resumed looping, starting over from the beginning. A chill ran down Muzazi's spine. He could feel it in the air. Something was about to change. In the throne room of the Shisha, there was a great cracking, with 2 sources. First, a shell of dust falling away as dormant lips opened into a grin. Second, joints crunching into action as someone sat up in their chair. Light entered the eyes of the great statue called the Supreme as it watched the message beaming out all over the Supremacy. Zachariah Esmeralda, oh, he remembered it like it was just yesterday. The statue became a man again, a curtain of dust falling off him as he rose to his feet, and the man began laughing. So wait, either Skipper fucking reverse Uno'd in 5 hours after its kidnapping, or this is clearly being framed by Avaman, yeah?
We'll have to see.
Damn. Okay. Side note, someone had a question I was supposed to ask you. Okay. What age did Muzazi perceive himself as before he lost luminescence?
Sort of early 20s.
How old is he actually?
So he's sort of early 30s.
Okay, so that's pretty much exactly what I thought. I was totally right. There you go, Sobek. Second question. You mentioned something in here I wanted to hear more about. What was it?
Old Demons of the Dawn.
Yeah, the old Demons of the Dawn.
So in the UAP, one of the 10 members of the governing council is a government called Ingnansi, who are basically work off sort of ancestor worship as their sort of guiding philosophy. Back during the Thousand Revolutions, some of the greatest warriors sort of record themselves into weapons, basically, to fight off the Gene Tyrants and defeat them.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Actually, no, that's my mistake. Sorry, not during the Thousand Revolutions. During a war with the Supremacy, basically. So this was like...
So you can, like, channel the old warriors.
Well, the more like... but at this point, like, over time, their minds inside the weapons have deteriorated and warped to such a degree that almost they're like demons at this point, or hostile, evil weapons. So, like, they're only given to people who can handle them. But that's where Gretchen got the idea of her recording her own consciousness to survive.
That's so cool. Can I also say something else?
Hmm?
I can tell you've also spoken a lot like me because I can hear the difference in your voice.
I'm also sick, keep in mind.
Yeah, I can't believe I couldn't do the Skipper voice because my throat's so fucked. I'm so embarrassed.
But yeah, Arc 11 is going to be fucking insane.
I'm here for it, baby. Oh my god. Alright, well thank you guys for listening as always, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.